The conclave Eterna was a chamber of sculpted silence, a place where the weight of 10,000 years of unbroken dominion could be felt in the very substance of the air. Its floor was a polished obsidian disk that mirrored a ceiling of captive stars, a slow, majestic swirl of nebulae and nascent suns held in a perfect, predictable ballet. At the chamber's heart, floating in a gravitic field that hummed just at the edge of perception, was the dais of judgment, where the High Arbiter Thrax sat upon a throne of woven light and solidified history. Before him, a single, impossibly vast hologram shimmered, a starship. It was a derelict, a ghost from the Concordance's own past, a vessel of a design discarded centuries ago. Its hull was a patchwork of alloys, its lines were clumsy and inefficient, and its energy signature was a flickering, pathetic thing, a candle guttering in the face of a supernova. This was one of the vessels from the sundered fleet, the collection of refuse and decommissioned relics the Vexel Concordance had so magnanimously gifted to the fledgling species known as humanity. It was a gesture of calculated pity, a way to pacify the primitive upstarts on their galactic border without offering them anything of true value. It was meant to be a leash, a technological dead end. And yet, Thrax felt a tremor of disquietude that had no place in this sanctuary of absolute order. The hologram before him was not a live feed. It was a reconstruction from the last long-range scan, an image that felt increasingly like a memory of a truth that had already shifted into something else. The humans had taken the junk. They had taken the scraps from the Vexel's table, the skeletal remains of an earlier, cruder age, and they had disappeared with them into the cloistered confines of their solitary star system. For generations, there had been only silence. Not the silence of gratitude, nor the silence of failure, but a deep, industrious silence that felt to Thrax like a held breath. Now that silence was breaking. Faint, anomalous energy readings had begun to bleed from the Terran system, whispers of activity that concordance sensors struggled to classify. They were not Vexel signatures. They were not like anything in the vast library of known galactic species. They were other. Air beside the dais warped, and the formidable, granite-like form of Grand Marshal Vorlag materialized, his ceremonial armor of polished chrome and obsidian seeming to drink the light from the chamber. His presence was a physical force, an embodiment of the Concordance's military might, unyielding, absolute, and utterly confident in its own supremacy. His gaze fell upon the hologram of the pathetic human vessel, and a low sound of contempt, like grinding stone, emanated from his vocalizer. "High Arbiter," he began, his voice a low thunder that vibrated in the obsidian floor. "You contemplate ghosts, these humans, they are scavengers. We gifted them with our refuse, and they have done nothing but fashion better dens from it. The anomalous readings are surely the death throes of our ancient engines, failing in their incompetent hands." Thrax did not turn his head. His ancient, multifaceted eyes remained fixed on the hologram. "Their silence has been too long, Grand Marshal. And the energies we now detect are not of decay. They are signatures of synthesis, of creation. They are chaotic, unpredictable." "Chaos is the hallmark of the primitive," Vorlag countered, stepping closer to the dais, his shadow falling across the mirrored floor like a creeping stain. "They are children playing with fire they cannot comprehend. The Council of Marshals is in agreement. A demonstration is required. A fleet should be dispatched to their system to inspect their progress. To remind them of the order of things, to show them the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the builders and the beggars." The word hung in the air: inspection. A Vexel inspection was a prelude to annexation, a gentle term for overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Thrax felt the cold certainty of Vorlag's logic, a logic that had secured the Concordance's peace for millennia. Any deviation from established order was a potential disease, and the only sane response was quarantine or excision. But this felt different. The humans had not been defiant. They had not been petitioners. They had simply been quiet. It was a response so alien to the galactic stage of bluster and diplomacy that it defied Vexel comprehension. Another shimmer of light, softer this time, coalesced on the other side of the dais. Loremaster Kalen appeared, his form slender and robed in fabrics that seemed to map the flow of cosmic energies. His mind was the Concordance's living library, a repository of history, philosophy, and xenological theory. His voice, when it came, was not a thunderous declaration, but a calm, resonant query that seemed to invite contemplation rather than demand obedience. "Or perhaps, Grand Marshal," he said, his gaze also on the hologram, "they are not children playing with fire, but students studying the nature of ash. We gave them not just machines, but problems. We gave them broken drives, failing reactors, and fractured targeting systems. To a mind like ours, steeped in the perfection of our own designs, such things are garbage. But to a mind that has never known perfection, they are the ultimate textbook. Every flaw is a lesson. Every failure is a guidepost. Vorlag turned his massive head toward Kalen, his contempt barely veiled. Loremaster, you romanticize vermin. They are a biological curiosity, a fleeting spark of ambition in a galaxy governed by ancient, immutable powers. Their lessons will amount to nothing. They have no access to the refined elements, no knowledge of the higher-order physics that power our fleets. They are trapped in a cage of our own design, and the rattling they make is of no consequence. Is it? Kalen's soft voice was unyielding. The energy signatures are not based on stable fusion or controlled singularity taps. Our technicians report patterns that resemble quantum probability waveforms, but in a state of violent, sustained incoherence. It is as if they took our engines, which are designed to suppress and control quantum chaos, and somehow weaponized it. They are not trying to fix our old machines, Marshal. I believe they are trying to understand the universal chaos our technology was designed to tame. Thrax finally shifted his gaze, looking from the warrior to the scholar, two pillars of his civilization, strength and knowledge in perfect opposition. The core of the issue remains, Thrax stated, his voice cutting through the tension. They are no longer silent, and their activity is directed. The emissions are not random. They are coalescing into a vector. He raised a slender, multi-jointed hand, and the star map of the chamber ceiling shifted. A faint, almost imperceptible line of light emerged from the distant dot of the human system, Saul. It was not aimed at Vexel space. It was not aimed at any known star or strategic point. It pointed toward a region the Vexel called the Veil of Whispers, a gravitationally anomalous, sensor-proof nebula where causality was known to fray and ships had been known to simply cease. It was a dead end of the galaxy, a cosmic graveyard that every sane species avoided. Vorlag stared at the vector, his certainty faltering for the briefest of moments. It is illogical, a navigational error. Their pathetic machines are likely dragging them to their doom. There has been no distress signal, Kalen observed quietly. No request for aid. The vector is deliberate, stable, and accelerating. They are going into the veil by choice. A profound silence descended upon the conclave Eterna once more. The simple fact of that trajectory was more unnerving than any declaration of war. It was an act of profound madness, or of a confidence so absolute it bordered on the divine. Why would a species, armed with nothing but the broken toys of a superior civilization, sail willingly into a place that even the masters of the galaxy feared? The hologram of the derelict ship continued to flicker at the center of the chamber, a monument to Vexel arrogance. Thrax looked at it, at its crude lines and patched-up hull, and for the first time he felt a sliver of an emotion that his people had not experienced in thousands of years. It was not fear, not yet. It was a cold, deep, and terrifying sense of awe. The scavengers were on the move, and they were not running, nor were they begging. They were sailing into the dark, and the great, ancient Vexel concordance had no idea why. The quiet work in their isolated system was over, and something new was about to be born from the ashes of Vexel history. The Vexel fleet emerged from the shimmering tier of hyperspace with the silent, brutal elegance of a predator revealing its claws. It was a vision of perfect order, an armada of warships whose hulls were forged from seamless, obsidian-like alloys, each vessel a perfect geometric expression of power. Their forms were sharp, angular, and absolute, designed to intimidate, to dominate, to convey the unyielding nature of the concordance itself. Grand Marshal Vorlag stood on the command deck of his flagship, the unassailable Truth Asterisk, a vast chamber of cold light and floating holographic displays. He watched as his fleet arranged itself into an inescapable grid formation, a net of overwhelming force cast across the bleak void at the edge of the Veil of Whispers. His finest sensor arrays, capable of resolving the atomic structure of a vessel from light minutes away, were focused on the approaching human contacts. The first readings that filtered through were confusing. The ship classifications flickered unstable. One moment the system identified the lead vessel as a Vexel Harbinger-class cruiser, a design decommissioned for 5 centuries. The next, it flagged the same ship as unidentified, its material composition and energy output fluctuating wildly. Vorlag's lip curled in a gesture of contempt. "Their hulls are failing," he announced to his bridge crew, his voice resonating with grim satisfaction. "The structural integrity fields are collapsing under the strain of continuous operation. They are literally falling apart as they fly." His officers murmured in agreement, their own displays showing the same chaotic data. The human ships were junk, just as he had said, and their desperate voyage was ending in a predictable, pathetic failure. But as the human fleet drew closer, emerging from the deep black into the cold, distant starlight, a collective stillness fell upon the bridge of the unassailable truth asterisk. The ships were not falling apart. They were wrong. They bore the skeletal shapes of the old Vexel designs, the familiar silhouettes of the sundered fleet, but it was as if they were being viewed through a heat haze, or through a flawed, warping lens. The lines of their hulls seemed to shimmer and shift, never quite settling into a definite state. Edges that should have been solid and clear were blurred, surrounded by a corona of faint, probabilistic light. The energy signatures were not the clean, precise hum of Vexel's singularity cores, but a cacophony, a discordant symphony of raw, untamed power that made the Concordance's delicate sensors scream with warnings of quantum instability. It was like looking at a fleet of ghosts, or echoes of ships that both existed and did not. "Report!" Vorlag's voice was a sharp crack of thunder in the sudden, unnerved silence. His chief sensor analyst, a Vexel of impeccable training, hesitated, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "Grand Marshal, I cannot. The readings are a logical contradiction. Their drive systems appear to be simultaneously online and offline. Their mass indicators are fluctuating by orders of magnitude, moment to moment. It is as if their ships are not moving asterisk through asterisk space, but are constantly reasserting their existence at new coordinates. It is a violation of established physics." Vorlag stared at the lead human vessel. It was shaped like an old cruiser, but its hull was not metal. It was a flowing, ever-changing tapestry of light and shadow, panels and armor plates seeming to phase into and out of reality. There were no visible weapon ports, no sensor dishes, no identifiable technology on its surface. There was only the shimmering, unstable form and the deep, unsettling hum that seemed to vibrate not through the void, but through the fabric of spacetime itself. This was not a fleet of broken machines. This was something else. This was a fleet of nightmares, a communications channel opened. It was not a request for contact, but a simple, clean signal that bypassed all Vexel encryption and protocols, appearing directly on the main view screen. The image that formed was of a human female. She was seated in a simple, unadorned chair, wearing a plain, dark uniform. Her surroundings were stark, almost monastic. There were no flashing lights, no bustling crew, only the quiet, focused calm of her presence. Her face was serene, her eyes a pale, piercing gray that seemed to look not just at Vorlag, but through him, into the heart of the Vexel psyche. The data feed identified her as Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Terran Confederacy. "Grand Marshal Vorlag of the Vexel Concordance," she began, her voice perfectly modulated, devoid of fear, anger, or any discernible emotion save a profound, unshakable calm. "We acknowledge your presence. We are conducting a scientific survey of the region designated the Vale of Whispers. For the safety of your fleet, we must insist you maintain your current position and do not approach any closer. Our vessels are engaged in operations that produce significant spatial-temporal distortion." Vorlag felt a surge of cold fury, an instinctual reaction to this insolence, a primitive species dictating terms to him. "Ambassador," he growled, his voice a low threat, "you are operating technology that is the sovereign property of the Concordance in a restricted sector. Your operations are a flagrant violation of galactic accords. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded for inspection." The ambassador's expression did not change. Not a flicker of an eye, not a tightening of the jaw. She simply absorbed his threat as if it were a piece of irrelevant data. "The technology we operate is of our own design," she replied, her tone still level, almost instructional. "The materials you provided were illustrative. They served as a foundational primer on principles you yourselves seem to have forgotten. We are not in violation of any accord, as our methods of propulsion and energy generation are not covered by any existing treaty." "They are new, Vorlag spat the word. "Impossible, you are scavengers, you have no infrastructure, no theoretical basis." "You gave us junk," Ambassador Rostova interrupted, and for the first time a flicker of something, not emotion but a profound emphasis, entered her voice. "You gave us broken tools and you expected us to learn only how to be broken, but we did not see shattered machines. We saw a grand, cosmic puzzle. Your ancestors built engines to enforce order on a chaotic universe. They wrestled with quantum uncertainty and bound it in chains of rigid, predictable laws. You have inherited the fruits of that labor, perfect machines that run on perfect principles. You have forgotten the struggle. You have forgotten the chaos you sought to conquer." She paused, her gaze seeming to intensify. "We did not seek to conquer it. We sought to understand it. We have learned to compose music from the noise you filter out. These ships do not fight against the chaos of reality. They embrace it. They are instruments of it." As she spoke, Loremaster Kalen's voice echoed in Vorlag's private command channel, a hushed, horrified whisper from the distant capital. Grand Marshal, she is telling the truth. I am cross-referencing the energy signatures with forbidden theoretical physics texts from the Age of Discovery. This is not engineering. It is metaphysics. They did not repair the singularity drives. They seem to have reverse-engineered the concept of a singularity. They are not creating stable gravitational wells. They are creating pockets of controlled, localized paradox. The ships are not flying. They are existing in a state of continuous, directed ontological shift. That is why the sensors fail. They are attempting to measure a ship that is, at a quantum level, in a superposition of multiple locations and states at once. Vorlag felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of his command deck. He was a warrior. He understood force, shields, energy beams, projectiles. He did not understand this philosophical warfare. He was facing a fleet that operated not on the principles of physics, but on the principles of logic and paradox. Before he could formulate a reply, a proximity alarm blared through the bridge. A swarm of objects, large asteroids or small moonlets, was emerging from the roiling clouds of the veil, propelled by some unknown gravitational tide. They were on a direct collision course with both fleets. It was a common, if dangerous, stellar phenomenon in this region. "Battle stations," Vorlag roared, his military instincts taking over. "Raise forward shields, target the largest fragments, and destroy them." The Vexel fleet responded with perfect, drilled precision. Shields of pure, golden energy shimmered into existence. Weapon ports opened, glowing with the promise of devastating power. The human fleet did not move. They did not raise shields. They did not power weapons. Ambassador Rostova simply watched Vorlag, her expression one of mild, detached curiosity. Then the lead human vessel, the one that shimmered like a ghost, drifted forward. It moved directly into the path of the largest asteroid, a rock the size of a small city. The Vexel targeting systems locked on, ready to fire, but Vorlag hesitated, watching. The human ship did not fire a laser. It did not launch a missile. It did not erect a shield. It simply waited. As the massive asteroid bore down upon it, seconds from a cataclysmic impact, the shimmering of the ship's hull intensified. The space around it seemed to warp. It buckled, folding in on itself like a piece of cosmic parchment. The asteroid, still moving at its incredible velocity, did not shatter against a shield or a hull. It simply vanished. It passed the point where the ship was, and then it was gone, not destroyed, not deflected. It had ceased to occupy their plane of reality. A moment later, a sensor officer on the unassailable truth screamed, "Impossible! Grand Marshal! That asteroid, its trajectory has been extra-dimensionally displaced. It just reappeared light years away on its original course, as if this entire sector of space had never been in its path." The rest of the asteroid field followed. One by one, they reached the human fleet and were not destroyed, but simply edited out of the local spacetime. The human ship sat in the void, untouched, their shimmering forms the only evidence of the impossible event that had just transpired. On the view screen, Ambassador Rostova finally blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. "As I stated, Grand Marshal," she said, her voice still an ocean of calm, "our operations create significant distortion. We would not wish for your vessels to be misplaced. Please, for your own safety, remain where you are." Vorlag stood frozen on his command deck. The perfect, geometric order of his fleet felt suddenly fragile, like a glass sculpture in the path of a tidal wave. He had come here to chastise scavengers, to put primitives back in their place. He had brought the unyielding logic of Vexel power, and he had been met with a calm, quiet, and utterly horrifying truth. Humanity had not just built a fleet from their junk. They had built a new kind of reality, and in this reality, the old rules of force and power no longer applied. The chasm between them was indeed unbridgeable, but it was the Vexel who were standing on the wrong side of it. He looked at the fleet of nightmares, and for the first time in his life, the Grand Marshal of the Vexel Concordance understood the profound and absolute nature of fear. The return of Grand Marshal Vorlag to the Conclave Eterna was not a triumphant arrival, but a somber, almost funereal procession. He stood before the dais of judgment, his chrome and obsidian armor seeming less a symbol of invincible might and more a hollow shell. The hologram at the center of the chamber no longer showed a single, derelict Vexal ship. It now displayed a live feed of the human fleet, holding its silent, shimmering vigil at the edge of the Veil of Whispers. The sight of those impossible vessels filled the grand chamber with a tension that was colder and heavier than any threat of war the Concordance had ever faced. This was not a challenge to their borders, but to the very foundation of their understanding. "They call it probabilistic engineering," Vorlag stated, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance, replaced by a quiet, shaken gravity. "They do not command their ships. They persuade them. They guide the quantum foam, nudging possibilities into becoming realities. The ships do not have engines in a way we would understand. They are contained, sustained paradoxes that rewrite their own position in spacetime. Their weapons do not project energy. They project localized certainty, collapsing the wave function of a target into a state of non-existence. They turned a mountain of rock into a memory without raising a shield or firing a shot. Loremaster Kalen listened, his slender form betraying a deep intellectual tremor. "They have weaponized philosophy," he whispered, the words echoing with a strange mix of terror and reverence. "For 10,000 years we have built our civilization on the principle of order. We perfected our science by eliminating variables, by creating systems that were absolute and predictable. We saw chaos as the enemy, a primordial force to be caged and tamed. The humans. They were given only our broken cages, and instead of trying to rebuild them, they chose to study the beast inside." High Arbiter Thrax looked from the warrior to the scholar, his ancient mind grappling with the scale of this revelation. The Vexel had reached the apex of their technological path. They had achieved a perfect, static, and utterly predictable mastery over the physical laws as they understood them. They had become a civilization of answers with no new questions to ask. Humanity, in their ignorance and desperation, had started with nothing but questions. They had looked at the Vexel's discarded answers and had seen them not as solutions, but as clues to a deeper, more complex set of problems. "They hold the keys to a new universe," Thrax said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to draw the light from the captive stars above. "And we gave them the locks. Our hubris has forged a power greater than any we could have conceived." He raised his hand, and the imposing image of Grand Marshal Vorlag vanished, replaced by the serene, unsettlingly calm face of Ambassador Eva Rostova. Thrax had opened a direct channel to the human flagship. "Ambassador," Thrax began, his tone formal, yet devoid of the condescension that had marked Vorlag's exchange. "I am High Arbiter Thrax of the Vexel Concordance. I speak for our people. We have witnessed the capabilities of your fleet. We have misunderstood you." Rostova's expression remained unchanged, her gray eyes holding his. "Understanding is a process, High Arbiter. It is not a destination. You are beginning that process now. That is sufficient." "Your purpose," Thrax stated, less a question than a plea for clarity. "Your fleet is a creation of profound power. It is a paradigm shift in the strategic balance of this galaxy. Yet you have made no demands. You have issued no threats. You sail toward a region of space that all other sentient life avoids. We ask a simple question. Why?" For a long moment, the human ambassador was silent. The quiet in the conclave Eterna was absolute. The fate of two civilizations, perhaps the entire galaxy, seemed to hang on her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was imbued with a deep, solemn gravity. "Because for all your power, High Arbiter, for all your perfect sensors and your millennia of accumulated knowledge, you have not been listening correctly." She gestured to someone or something off-screen. The view behind her changed. It was no longer the stark interior of her ship. It was a visual representation of cosmic background radiation, the faint, residual echo of the universe's creation. To a Vexel, it was a familiar image, a sea of gentle, predictable static, but then the human representation shifted. It was filtered, processed through their probabilistic sensors, and the static was no longer random. A pattern emerged. It was not a signal, not a message in any language. It was a slow, creeping, and horrifyingly perfect absence asterisk. Great, spreading patches of the background radiation were gone, not blocked, not distorted. They were being erased. It was a creeping silence, a stain of absolute nothingness that was slowly, methodically consuming the oldest light in the universe. It was a shadow falling across the cosmos, a void that was expanding from the direction of the intergalactic abyss. "For generations," Rostova continued, her voice a near whisper, "we listened to the stars with the crude instruments you now see on our museum walls. We heard only noise. But as our understanding grew, we learned to listen to the spaces between the noise. Your sensors are too perfect, High Arbiter. They are designed to filter out imperfection, to discard static and quantum jitter as meaningless data. You built a monitoring system that could only hear the song of creation, so you have been deaf to the sound of its unmaking." Kalen stepped forward, his body trembling, his mind racing through ancient prophecies and cosmological theories of universal death. "The Great Silence," he breathed. "A myth. A theoretical end state where information ceases to exist, where entropy reaches its final absolute victory." "It is not a theory," Rostova said, her gaze unblinking. "And it is not a natural process. It is a presence, something ancient and vast and utterly inimical to the complexity we call life. It does not travel through space. It consumes it. It does not destroy matter and energy. It erases the information that defines them. The veil of whispers is not a natural nebula. It is the leading edge of this corrosion. It is a place where the laws of physics are beginning to fray, where reality is becoming thin. That is why your ships disappear there. They are not destroyed. They are nullified. The full cataclysmic weight of her words settled upon the conclave. The Vexil had spent their entire history policing the squabbles of younger races, maintaining their perfect, ordered garden, all while a silent, invisible fire was consuming the very fabric of the forest around them. Their greatest enemy was not a rival empire or a biological plague. It was a creeping, cosmic nullity that their own perfection had rendered them blind to. "This fleet," Thrax said, his voice hollow as he looked at the shimmering, paradoxical ships with new, horrified eyes. "It was never for us." "No," Ambassador Rostova confirmed. "It was not. We knew we could never match your conventional power. We knew we could never win a war fought by your rules with your technology, so we changed the rules. The junk you gave us was our only hope. We had to develop a science that could function where science breaks down. We had to build ships that could sail on seas of chaos, that could navigate a reality that is unraveling. This fleet was not built to fight you. It was built to fight the silence. We are not here as conquerors, High Arbiter. We are here because this is the front line in a war you did not even know had begun." A new alliance was not forged in that moment through treaties or negotiations. It was born of a shared existential dread. The Vexil, with their vast resources and industrial might, and humanity, with their terrifying, brilliant mastery of the impossible. The two species, the master and the scavenger, the perfectionist and the pragmatist, were now bound together by a threat that dwarfed all their previous conflicts. High Arbiter Thrax stood in the conclave Eterna long after the communication had ended. He dismissed Vorlag and Kalen, needing to be alone in the echoing silence of his grand chamber. The hologram at the center now showed two fleets, side by side at the edge of the veil. There were the perfect, rigid, geometric vessels of the Vexil Concordance, looking for all the galaxy like immutable truths carved from the void. And beside them, the shimmering, shifting, ghost-like ships of the Terran Confederacy, vessels that looked like truths that were still being debated. Order and chaos aligned against oblivion. He thought back to the initial debate, to Vorlag's contempt and Kalen's curiosity. They had both been wrong. They had debated whether humanity's work was a nuisance or an intellectual curiosity. They had failed to consider the third possibility, that it was a desperate, brilliant prayer. A prayer whispered into the void, answered not by gods, but by the relentless, logical application of a mindset born from scarcity and struggle. "They gave us junk," he imagined a human engineer saying, perhaps centuries ago, as they first laid hands on the Vexil's broken relics. The words formed in his mind with the cold, clear ring of cosmic irony. They gave us junk, their cast-off his. Tori, their forgotten problems. They showed us the limits of their universe. And from that junk we built a fleet of nightmares. Nightmares not for them, but for the true, silent darkness that waits for us all. Thrax looked at the combined fleet, a fragile line of light and paradox drawn against an endless night, and he felt the 10,000-year peace of his civilization finally, irrevocably, end. A new age had begun, an age of impossible alliances and unimaginable wars, and it had been born from the trash of a forgotten warship and the indomitable, terrifying will of a species that had learned to find salvation in the scrap heap. The silence was coming, but now, for the first time, someone was ready to scream back.